now?
I am ready.
Okay, and then 1, 2, 3, and we start our webinar for the day.
Welcome everyone to INFRA Plus webinar series. Let's introduce myself. My name is Juliano Costa Gonçalves. I am a professor at the Department of Environmental Science at the Federal University of São Carlos, and am I responsible for sharing this first session. INFRA Plus webinar series are convened by Dr. Deliana Iosifova and her team. I would like to thank you, Deliana and Norma, for inviting me to share this session. The INFRA Plus webinar series aims to identify links between context-specific infrastructural challenges, approaches to their solution, and universal mechanisms towards improved sustainability. INFRA Plus will be running up until July, almost on a weekly basis. So do please feel free to check out events to come via Eventbrite and definitely register if they are of interest. Please also share the events widely among your colleagues and students where you see appropriate. The webinar will be recorded. Records will be posted on the INFRA Plus and SUS Infra website and YouTube. So today we welcome 4 amazing speakers who will give us 4 talks with the focus area of South America. Each talk will be delivered at around 15 minutes, and we then have 10 minutes to open up questions and discussions from the audience. Attendees will be able to participate through the chat. I would like to introduce today's speakers. Dr. Jorge Luiz Nobre Gouveia works at CETESB. CETESB is the Portuguese acronym for Environmental Company of São Paulo State. Dr. Jorge has PhD in Sciences from the Energy and Nuclear Research Institute and master's degree in Public Health from the University of São Paulo. Graduation in Industrial Chemistry from the Federal University of Paraíba. He is currently manager of the Strategic and Institutional Development Department at CETESB. Today, Dr. Jorge will be speaking about the organizational characteristics of CETESB and the current challenges faced in responding to critical environment problems, such as accidents and disasters, related to different environmental hazards in the recent context of the state of São Paulo, Brazil. The second speaker is Dr. Denise Lozano Lazo from University of Tokyo. Dr. Diniz recently concluded her doctoral studies at the graduate program in Sustainability Science, Global Leadership Initiative at the University of Tokyo. She has master's degree in development studies at the Graduate Institute of International and Development Studies, Geneva. Her research focuses on solid waste management system in Bolivia and, more broadly, on urban challenges in developing countries. The third speaker is Dr. Cristine Diniz Santiago from Federal University of São Carlos. Cristine has PhD and master's degree in environmental sciences at the Federal University of São Carlos State of São Paulo, Brazil. She is manager and environmental analyst and worked between 2016 and 2018 as a consultant for the Pan American Health Organization, providing technical support to the Department of Public Health Engineering of the National Health Foundation regarding the management of research development. To discuss in this first session, Mr. Sidney Furtado. He is Director of the Department of Civil Defense of the Municipality of Campinas, State of São Paulo, Brazil, representative of the UN campaign Resilient Cities. Today, Dr. Jorge will be speaking about the organizational characteristics of CETESB and the current challenges facing in responding to critical environment problems, such as accidents and disasters, related to different environmental hazards in the recent context of the state of São Paulo, Brazil. Dr. Diniz will be speaking about municipal solid waste management that remains a challenge issue in most development countries, with rapid urbanization adding an additional pressure to local governments, resulting in various negative impacts to the environment, public health, and quality of life. Presentation of Denise introduced the application of a transdisciplinary and system-based approach in the study of sustainability of the municipal solid waste management system in Santa Cruz de la Sierra, a rapidly urbanized city of Bolivia. Today, Dr. Christian will be speaking about waste management in the pandemic, obstacles, learnings, and lessons. The pandemic highlighted existing issues for waste management in Brazil and the new ones arose. In this context of disaster, the goal was to reflect based on the vulnerability dimensions related to waste management, focusing on a transdisciplinary approach. So, I will give now the floor to Dr. Jorge.
Thank you, Juliano. Thank you, Juliano. As mentioned before, I'm in charge of the strategic and institution development of Department of CETESB. And first of all, I'd like to invite thank you for the invitation and say that Dr. Patricia apologized for not being able to participate in this event today. So I have a hard task to replace her, of course. Sorry for the expectations to see her today. But let's see. In this presentation, and this short presentation, I will try to show how CETESB is structured and how deal with environmental issues, especially with environmental accidents. So just to begin, CETESB was established in 1968. So CETESB during the last 5 decades has improving and has learned a lot with the challenge to face with environmental problems, especially the state of São Paulo, for those who are not from South America and Brazil, is a complex system, and especially due to our population, the size of the state of São Paulo. But we have approximately 1,600 employees, technicians, a diverse group of experts around the state of São Paulo. CETESB has 46 branches across the state and 18 labs, some of them in our head office in the city of São Paulo and the others on countryside. Basically, our mission, as you can see here, is to protect the health, the public health, and the environment, both connected. Here are some of the activities that give support to CETESB in order for the permit activities in the state of São Paulo. So environmental monitoring and pollution control. Environmental monitoring is something that CETESB has different groups, labs, and experts to do this task. Inspection, the license potential for polluting activities, inspection license of vegetation, cutting and interventions in permanent preservation areas, response to chemical emergencies, risk analysis, environmental trainings. It has a school and provide technical training for not only for CETESB technicians, but to receive people from the other agencies. And based on the several environmental monitoring networks has been operate over time, assess the work, the quality of air, surface, groundwater, and as well as beach and coastal waters. It has been published every year reports with those issues. And in this image here, the report of air quality was launched last month. But you can also have access, for example, in an app, you can check, you can see the air quality of air every hour, as the same with for the coast water quality. You can check and see how is the quality of that beach. And CETESB has a permanent open working 20 hours per day response for chemical emergencies or environmental accidents, receiving calls from population, fire departments, civil defense, and the other institution agents, receive the call and put the actions in duty to support and participate of the accident, of the emergency. According to this data and information, CETESB started this activity in 1978, when there was an oil spill on the north coast of São Paulo caused a large damage to the sensitive areas at that region. So CETESB realized that needs to organize people for dealing with environmental accidents. So in the last 20 years, maybe 50 years, an average of 350 environmental accidents, almost one per day. Basically, these activities, according to this illustration, most of the accidents happen in road transportation. For obvious reason for Brazil, for this, the road transportation is much more used, and followed by industries and the other causes of environmental accidents. Here, so just to give an example of some manuals, some guidelines that CETESB produce in order to help people from CETESB, from other states. Unfortunately, it is available only in Portuguese, but this was published in 2014. And for this, for giving this response, it has special vehicles equipped like firefighters, but firefighters from the environmental agents in order to give us. It's the same model using in US EPA for the local, even for federal level in the United States and local agencies in every state. It has been learned a lot with this model and applied here in São Paulo. Here are some actions that are made, that are taken to minimize the damage to the property, private and the public property, the environment and the community during the environmental accidents. And talking about environmental action, these are some of these actions taken when in the first moment, in the emergency situation, what you need to do to reduce the impact of soil and water to avoid contaminated areas. So in situ assessment, substance identification, their risks, their main risks, requirement of suitable polluting actions, to assure appropriate actions for life and environmental safety, monitoring the areas due to the dangerous substance, noxious substance, sampling collection. If need, some parameters you need to detect in real time, and some you can collect and send to the labs. Just to give an example, sample collection is necessary to characterize the emergency situation in order to take what are the principal intervention you need to reduce the contamination. And another example of the fauna, the survey of fauna, in this case here, birds, oilets, caused oil but substance. Product identification involving their main risks, as it has been collaborate with other regions, other states of Brazil, and even in Latin America. Here, it's a very important task during an emergency situation. Reduce the amount of waste, of chemical waste, of hazardous waste. And in this case, to illustrate, it's an oil spill and on sand in a beach, and you have to very carefully remove surface the sand contaminated, not to generate a large amount of waste. Here, just to give you an example of how can an accident cause an interruption, very damage to the society. Here is a very important highway in the state of São Paulo, and on arrival of the city of São Paulo, then the highway was blocked for 2 hours in both directions, caused by an emergency situation. Can you imagine the difficult situation for people not allowed to arrive to work or to study or to do anything. And this accident, for example, you have to use specifically PPE, personal protective equipment, working together with civil defense, with firefighters in order to evaluate the damage. In this case, the driver died caused by the accident and the corrosive substance involved in the accident, hydrochloric acid. Here in a rural area, so an accident in a rural area, and during when the sugar is transported by truck to the station and then transferred by train. But during the storage, it was a fire caused a very, very serious damage to the water of the river, because the sugar caramelized, burned, get into the river and caused the death of more than 10,000, about 15,000, 14 tons of fish. It's not caused by a chemical substance, caused by sugar. Why? Because it causes the decrease of the dissolved oxygen level. Here are some images trying to rescue some fish still alive. And here, one of the most, I think in the world, the most serious fire in a maritime terminal involving chemicals, in this case, products, gasoline and ethanol. This accident took place in 2015 and it was during for 9 days, burning tanks, 4 tanks, I think, 4 tanks of gasoline and 2 tanks of ethanol, and interrupted the activity, the industrial, the economic activity of in the region of the port of Santos. So firefighters basically for 9 days. So imagine the damage to the air quality, water, soil, and the fauna. And one of the problems faced in this accident was the large amount of chemical foam to extinguish the fire. It is some of these products is still very toxic, and it caused toxicity combined with the rising of the temperature, the foam chemical, and the gasoline compounds, organic compounds, cause the fish kill of 10 tons of fish. Imagine this, when it's happened, we have to remove immediately, not to allow people, the population, the local community to catch this fish, of course, because probably some of the reasons are toxicity. Here are our infrastructure to deal and to support people in the field, the laboratories, to collect fish, in order to investigate the cause of death, collect samples, and then launch a technical report based on all these elements. So in this case, the cause of the death was low oxygen and toxicity, plus fish tissue and sediment analysis of quality evaluation. Here, another image of the large amount of foam used in this case. Here, another example of cooperation of CETESB, in this case, not in Brazil, but in Antarctica. CETESB provides support to the Minister of Environment of Brazil and named CETESB to participate because of a fire that occurred in 2012 and destroyed our Brazilian base in Antarctica. And this, of course, research there with labs, chemicals, gas, and the fuel used in Antarctica to the boats or to the vehicles caused the contamination of the soil. So in the first moment, CETESB sent 2 technicians, and then it was accomplished during almost 8 years. CETESB every year sent missions to the summertime of Antarctica in order to collect topsoil, sediment, topsoil, groundwater, and soil in order to evaluate the contamination of the air. And here, as you can see, in last year in January, our Brazilian base was a new one. It was installed a new base, so the work finished in 2020. Probably, I don't know if we continue going to there. And CETESB High School, CETESB has a postgraduate course, environmental compliance with legal technical requirements, and a program of courses, that an open course for people in general that come to CETESB to take part in this training course, and specialized practical training that is offered in our labs. Of course, most of this training last year was not allowed to offer, especially those courses that involve visits, technical visits in industry, landfills, etc. And here are some of the actions that we do before the accident or after the accident in order to study the causes and the lessons learned in this, in order to prevent, involving agents, government agents, private sector, and the other agents, in order to prevent the accidents also happening on the coast. As I told you before, the first accident that CETESB registered in 1978 was with an oil spill. But oil spill in the state of São Paulo, for those who lives in Brazil or in São Paulo, probably will not remember when was the last oil spill. Why? Because many things were adopted, preventive measures. So constantly, I'd say that we were much more in preventive actions than in corrective actions. In this case, there is a national plan, a regional plan, and a local plan, and we work in the local plan in the state of São Paulo, in the north of the coast, there is a port, and the region of the region of Santos, on the port of Santos, there is a regional plan where many local plans are connected, are put in together in a regional plan in order to prevent oil spill and to be more prepared, more equipped, and to have a better response. This is, for example, the two plans of Santos above and of São Sebastião port. There are two plans that every month people work together in a meeting to discuss, to do drills, simulation, exercise in the field, to put in practice the best practice to combat oil spill. So thank you for your kind attention, and we have a good day today and good work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jorge, for your informative and instructive speak about CETESB activities. So we can continue to the next presentation. I will now give the floor to Denise.
Thank you. Thank you, Juliano. So I will share my screen now. I hope you can see it. Again, thank you. It's a pleasure to be a participant at the webinar. And I will share with you a little bit of my doctoral research process, which is based on the solid waste management in Santa Cruz de la Sierra in Bolivia. And just to start a little bit with the background, well, I would like to talk about the solid waste management as the SDGs. So as many of you may know, the solid waste management has been considered to be a critical issue and a cross-cutting issue, which interacts with at least 12 of the SDGs. And among the most important are the SDG 6 through the target in the elimination of waste dumping, the SDG 8 through the circular economy's implementation involving both formal and informal recycling sectors, SDG 11 through the improvement of waste collection coverage, and SDG 12 to the advancing the 3R practices and efficient use of natural resources. Now, why is solid waste management so important, particularly for developing countries? Well, there is a great discrepancy, even until now, in the performance of municipal solid waste management systems throughout countries according to their industrialization or development level. And in developing countries, it's usual that at least even the most basic aspects such as collection coverage or collection quality or the safe environmental disposal are still under low levels of performance. But moreover, there is the largest increase in terms of the waste generation is occurring in developing countries, and more particularly lower middle income countries. And this is due to different issues such as the changes in production and consumption patterns, as well as the population growth. And also there has been more and more a recognition of the increased complexity in these countries, which also affects topics such as the sustainability of the solid waste management. And some of these issues are related to urbanization, inequality, economic growth, cultural and socioeconomic aspects, the political landscape, which is so conflicting in many of the countries in South America and Latin America, and also the external dependency on funds for implementation of solid waste management projects, not only at the beginning, but for the total or the continuous operation of these infrastructures. And particularly in the Latin American region, some issues that also add to this complexity affecting solid waste management are the high rates of urbanization in this region. And maybe because of there is this idea of large availability of land, there has been a preference for disposal techniques related to open dams and sanitary landfills, leading to relatively low rates of waste diversion compared to, for example, countries in Asia, developing countries in Asia. And these recycling activities depend almost completely on the informal sector for the recovery of the recyclable material. Now, I won't talk in detail about all the objectives of my research, but some major goals that we tried to achieve together with my supervisor was to first to try to grasp in a better way this complexity that I've talked about, using a system perspective to try to understand in a better way the interactions among the different elements and dimensions of the municipal solid waste management system. At the same time, to increase the attention on the social dimension of the municipal solid waste management, moving away from a purely engineering approach that I think is still predominant in Bolivia and probably other countries of the region. And finally, to try to apply a transdisciplinary approach involving both academic and non-academic actors throughout the research stages, and also trying to apply or combine different types of methodologies. Again, without going too much into detail, the research scope included mainly 4 major components. And the first one was related to an institutional analysis, which aimed to understand the sustainability transitions of the solid waste management in the case study. And this was done through mainly semi-structured interviews. After that, we tried to do this systemic modeling of solid waste management, which we did in a participatory way, with stakeholders from the main stakeholder groups involved. And they basically provided the inputs to understand which were the more important variables in the system, the most important impacts, and how they interact with each other. And this activity led to identifying which were the practices or the most important practices that needed to be assessed. So the next stage was the assessment of practices, which use mainly surveys and statistical analysis, but also other types of methodologies to complement the results, such as a participatory observation and also video recording activities with the informal waste picking sector. And from that, these results also serve as an input for the last step, which was a software simulation in order to explore future outcomes of different under different scenarios. Just to explain a little bit more about the case study, as I mentioned, is the city of Santa Cruz de la Sierra, and Santa Cruz de la Sierra is the capital of the Santa Cruz department in Bolivia. Bolivia as a whole is a relatively small country in population. It has 11 million people and divided in 9 main administrative divisions, which are called departments. And Bolivia is one of the countries with the lower development indexes in Latin America. However, Santa Cruz de la Sierra is considered to be the economic pole of the country, and it has the largest population. The municipality, around 2 million people, and with considering the metropolitan region, a little bit more than 3 million people. And because of this economic growth that the city experienced in the last decades, it started to attract many people from different areas of the country and also from abroad, which led to an accelerated population growth that was uncontrolled and that led to urban sprawl and illegal settlements that made the provision of public services more difficult. And well, as you can see, there is mainly some horizontal expansion in the infrastructure. Only in the city center, you can see a little bit more vertical constructions on infrastructure. So as long as when you start moving away from the city center, you see these things that such as the lack of pavement in the streets, maybe in some areas lack of sewage, stray animals, and all these things have some impact in the way that the collection and the solid waste management activities are carried out. And as you can see here also, there has been a exponential increase in the solid waste collection in the city, which comes predominantly from household areas. And because of this rapid urbanization and the lack of ability to cope with these issues, we can see in the city the results of household waste dumping, backyard burning or household waste burning, and the recycling activity, which is done without regulation and without much support, which leads to also to risk for the people that engage in these activities. And just to go a little bit more into detail with the setting, you have mainly two parts. The formal part, which starts right after the people generate the waste and take it out, whether they put them in some container or directly in the floor. Then the waste is collected and is transported directly to the landfill. So there is no intermediate transfer station or anything like that. And in theory, there is supposed to be a separate collection of only recyclable materials, which are supposed to be taken to a municipal separation plant. But in reality, the extent to which this is implemented is unclear, and it's definitely not consistently implemented throughout the city. At the same time, there is an informal setting, an informal part of the system, which starts right after the generation, with people that independently or through small groups, familiar groups, or in small associations, collect the material, the recyclable material from the unsorted waste. If they have the capacity, they try to store it in order to generate economies of scale. And then they sell it to middlemen, who act as intermediates in between them and the recycling industries. Now, about the research activities that we conducted, as I said at the beginning, we started by an institutional analysis, trying to understand the perspectives from different stakeholders about the evolution of the solid waste management, both at the national and local level, the sustainability from their view in the Bolivian context, the barriers and enablers that they identify, and also the roles and main interactions with other stakeholders. And through that, we were able to, more or less to some level of detail, identifying the main connections between these stakeholders and also which were the most important ones. And also through the interviews and through the bibliographic review, we were able to identify that basically there have been three transitions in the focus of the sustainability in solid waste management. And the first one mostly focused on just collecting the waste and disposing it in a centralized way. The second one through the creation of the landfill, the only landfill in the city. And the third one where there is some attempts to engage in some circular economy approaches. But because of this rapid urbanization and the explosive growth of the city, these three transitions are overlapping with each other, and none of them is fully complete. So the three of them compete in terms of budgetary allocation and importance for the government. The second stage was related, as I said, to systemic modeling, and through that we used the group modeling building workshops using the causal loop diagrams tools. And basically what we did in those sessions, what was with the main stakeholders involved in the activity in the city, we map these variables and these impacts, identifying which was the ones that they thought were the most important. And in that sense, we were able to create a qualitative map divided in 5 main modules, such as waste generation, the common solid waste management practices, separation practices and recycling activities, waste disposal, and one for the main flows and costs. And it's from these sessions where the main activities that were going to be researched or assessed were identified. So we decided to focus on household waste because they was the one that was considered the most important. And we did 3 studies related to the household waste. And for each one of them was quite important for the overall results of the research and also for the next steps. So the first research activity was related to the characterization and overall researching the waste generation rates in the city and the influencing factors. So for that, we work with the municipal cleansing company, a local university, and also the informal waste pickers, which instructed the students into how they could identify in a better way the different types of components in the waste. The next stage was the household surveys to try to understand in a better way why people engage in certain type of activities such as dumping and burning, and also what motivated them to separate or recycle the recyclable materials. And that was also quite important to count with the support of another of the universities in the city, because otherwise the people in the households would not communicate with us, would have some suspicion about talking to us and giving information. Finally, the part with the waste pickers was also quite important to use the contacts that we established at the beginning through the interviews, where we involved the leaders of these associations. And through these contacts, we were able to reach these people who are originally quite distrustful of giving information to researchers. As I said, I won't go much into detail about the results, but basically throughout the household solid waste management practices, we identified that large parts of the population do not have basic conditions to comply. And so it's not maybe a lack of awareness or education, but more about the conditions to comply with these requirements. And also we identified that there was a relatively high source separation despite the lack of a formal system taking in place. About the waste picking activities, we identified that there was some fragmentation process that had been occurring in the last decade due to the cease of NGO support and the new activities taken by the private cleansing company. But despite of this fragmentation and even the associations at the moment of the surveys were not all of them were active, still the effects of this association process were seen in the different outcomes, comparing people who were associated versus people who were not in part of these associations. Yeah, just some findings and reflections and some challenges and limitations but maybe we can leave this for the Q&A session in order to not take so much time. Yeah, that would be it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Denise, to share with us the municipal waste solid management in Santa Cruz de la Sierra.
Thanks.
Remind us, attendees will be able to participate through the chat. Please type your questions or comments. To the next presentation, I will give the floor to Christine.
Thank you, Professor. Well, greetings, everyone. And first of all, I would like to thank very much Professor Norma and Professor Juliano for the invitation to be here today. I'm really honored to be among such brilliant people working towards improving our cities. And I share some of our work on waste management in the pandemic, obstacles, learnings, and lessons. For a brief context of this work, it was part of a book Professor Norma organized on the multi-layered crisis we are facing, its challenges, and how to face them. So I co-authored this chapter, which has the same title as the presentation, with Professor Juliano, who's chairing this session, and Professor Erica Pugliese, also from the Federal University of São Carlos. So to start with a brief context of the pandemic in Brazil, we had a late arrival of the disease if we compare to Asia or Europe countries. And as most of you should know, we did not have a central response from our government. Also, our government showed no consideration for the World Health Organization guidelines, and there was a lot of denial about the pandemic in our country, and it was even considered the worst government response to the pandemic. So we had 4 health ministers in a period of little less than 2 years, and this led us to a situation of more than 470,000 deaths up till now. In this context, the pandemic is a disruptive event, and it also exposes our development model that does not internalize the externalities. So we can consider the pandemic as a disaster, which can be understood as a threat that hits a vulnerable society. Well, talking about a little bit about waste management in Brazil, we have federal directives since 2010, that's from when we had our framework approved. And even though the directives are from the national government, the cities are responsible to implement waste management. So there is a huge need for articulation and good governance. I think Denise talked a little bit about that as well. Also, we have a very representative informal recycling sector represented by the waste pickers, as we can see in the lower picture here in the slide. And we have a characteristic of having many manual processes as opposed to automated ones. So how was the waste management during the pandemic in Brazil? We had a generation variation. We had cities that saw a rise on the waste generation, others had lower waste generation. Also logistics. So in many cities, the regions, the central and commercial regions did not generate as much waste because of the lockdowns and other restriction situations. And this caused logistic challenges for our systems. Also, we had a huge rise on healthcare waste, as well as many other countries. And the worker safety was really a challenge because of our very manual characteristic. So we try to reflect and analyze obstacles and learnings during this pandemic, this disaster, considering vulnerability dimensions and future possibilities. So this is a transdisciplinary approach that we did. To start talking about the vulnerability dimensions and waste management, in 2001, McIntyre proposed 6 dimensions to analyze vulnerability, and those dimensions are physical, social, cultural, political, economic, and technological. Of course, those dimensions are isolated, they were proposed isolatedly, but they are obviously linked and very much intertwined. So the dimensions help us to do the analysis, help us to observe certain aspects isolatedly, but it's important not to lose the big picture. Starting with the physical dimension, we have hazardous and potentially contaminated waste as a huge risk for society and workers, especially in the beginning of the pandemic when we did not know much about the prevalence of the virus in different surfaces. Also, we have a link with the technological dimension because we have those essentially manual processes, as I commented before, like in collection and recycling systems. Also, the pandemic potentialized infrastructure risks, such as inadequate ventilation, which maybe some facilities already have and were potentialized. And healthcare waste brought risks related to the storage capacity in healthcare facilities. Regarding the social dimension, the lack of knowledge by the population led many times to inadequate disposal of waste. For example, the disposal of protection masks along with the recyclable waste. And this meant risks for the waste pickers, mainly. Also, we had our resilience weakened by a no prevention and no source segregation culture. So it was even harder to adapt to new directives or new in this new situation. And also talking about the selective collection, which happens formally in less than 40% of Brazilian cities, according to the government. We have several types of responses, but generally it was not observed as an essential service here in our country, unlike other countries, for example, in the global north, that did not stop recycling systems. Regarding the cultural dimension, we have a very negative perception towards waste. So people see waste as having no value instead of seeing the reinsertion possibilities. And there's also a lack of individual responsibility. So people are just worried about the removal of the waste off their doorstep, with not much worry about where is it going afterwards. Also, in this context, workers are invisible to society, especially waste pickers. And there is a resistance by society to pay for waste management services. And this is a serious problem here in Brazil because it potentializes already poor economic situations of the cities. And also here we have links to the social and economic dimensions. Talking about the political dimension, the federal government was omiss, not only in waste management, but also in this area, which led to poor planning and prevention, and really was even harder to go through this moment. When you analyze regional planning, the state's planning, you see that the directives they had for emergency situations did not apply to the pandemic. So when states thought about some kind of prevention, they thought about interruption of the services due to strikes, for example, and the responses they foresee in the documents do not apply to this pandemic context. In the local level, cities' responses were diverse and mostly reactive. So although there were few contingency plans, they were highly operational and did not have much participation of the society or were not much focused on communication, which makes it hard for the strategy to be implemented. And also the situation potentializes low participation in public policies. Regarding the economic dimension, we had a huge oscillation of recyclable prices, and this potentializes the waste pickers' vulnerability, and they are already a very vulnerable group in our unequal society here in Brazil. And with situations of quarantine or circulation restrictions, it meant that waste pickers could not work and consequently did not have any income because they are informal workers. Also, if they tried to go to work to get some income, for example, to eat or pay their bills, there were huge risks of contamination because they had no money for protection like masks or gloves because the prices of this equipment rise a lot during the pandemic. Also, the bad economic situation Brazil was already going through was worsened by the pandemic, and this means more people working as waste pickers, and this can generate situations of conflicts with groups already working and disputes for regions and so on. Also, the pandemic potentialized poor financial situation of cities' budgets. And in Brazil, waste management represents a huge part of the city expenses. And this means a threat to the services, not only in quality, but in terms of continuity of the services. And here we have a huge link to the social dimension. Finally, talking about the technological dimension, we had healthcare waste overcharging completely management and treatment systems. And this was not only a Brazilian reality, but we also had a lot of inadequate disposal of potentially hazardous waste, representing risks for humans and also the environment. And lastly, Brazilian waste management model proved to be fragile, not resilient, poor in planning, and only having basic infrastructure, meaning it was very hard to adapt and demands lots of improvements. Considering this, we tried to analyze waste management together with the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. So basically, we tried to look at waste management through the disaster and risk management perspective. Then we see that waste management is a very important aspect when talking about disaster and risk management. And Dr. Jorge commented a little about this. And then our exercise was to see what learnings can we take from the Sendai framework. And those learnings are that waste management risks and vulnerability need research and action, and we need to work in areas like communication, accountability, capacity building, and articulation. Also, it's necessary to integrate disaster and waste management. So we need waste planning to include disaster prevention and resilience, as well as participation and safety of the stakeholders. The third point is that logistics and financial investments are needed for research and policy, and also for workers' resilience. And the last is that it's necessary to have recurrent reviews on preparedness, on strengthening tools to awareness and communication, also promoting resilient infrastructure for essential services. So we can conclude that as any other disaster, the COVID-19 pandemic exposes vulnerabilities in all dimensions we analyze here, but it also helps us to understand those dimensions. And it's obviously necessary to create a culture of prevention, preparedness, and resilience for disaster and risk in waste management in Brazil. And this demands learning from experience and also working towards a more equal society, which distributes risks in a more equal way. And here, as we could see, the risks were very much focused on the most vulnerable group, which is the waste pickers group. Also, learning from a disaster is what's really positive about the occurrence of a disaster. It's the only thing positive about it. And if we do not learn now with this opportunity, it may lead us to worse disasters and worse responses in the future. So it's really something we should be working on from now on. And last, it's important to ask ourselves, because Brazil is a signatory of Sendai's framework since 2015. So who is to be held responsible for the avoidable losses we have so far? And here we have some references, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Christine, to present to us the waste management in the pandemic, discussing the Brazilian case. In this first session, the discussant is Mr. Sidney Furtado. So, I will now give the floor to Mr. Sidney.
I don't know if it was possible for Sidney to join us today. It's because he's from an emergency situation in the Campinas city, I suppose. While we are waiting for Sidney, if it is possible, Juliana, I have well, the three presentation was pretty amazing. Thank you very much for the speakers of this first session. But I have a little question for Jorge Gouveia. It's possible to
Sure.
Okay. Jorge, yesterday, a prestigious hydrology of the Federal University of Viçosa, Professor Ana Augusta Rezende, said to us in a presentation in the Federal University of São Carlos that that traces of the SARS-CoV-2 are being identified in the rivers of Brazil. I don't know if the water and sewage systems of treatment in the municipalities of the São Paulo state is able to deal with the kind of threat. My question is if CETESB has any kind of role in monitoring this kind of threat.
Thank you, Norma. Very good question. I couldn't mention, because I have not enough time to mention everything that CETESB is doing, but specifically in this topic, yes, CETESB last year started a program of monitoring the sewage system and the plants that treat the sewage in order to see the efficiency. And it's we put this in our plan for this 2021 this year, and this program is ongoing, during this year. Dr. Maria Inês, that is the responsible for the laboratories of here at the head office, is in charge of this subject. Very good question. What CETESB didn't do up to now, I think, to put this to communicate to the population. Is waiting for the result. It's important not only to see the efficiency of these treatment plants, but also to see after the vaccine, how could the SARS-CoV could decrease, at least what we wait. So there are many reasons to do this. Remember that CETESB is an environment agency, but when I mentioned in the beginning of my presentation, the mission is to protect the public health and the environment. So we are doing this. I'm not, of course, the person more appropriate to talk with details of the program, but Maria Inês, I could put in contact with you if you need.
Thank you, Jorge. I don't know if you have other question, Juliana. I suppose in the chat.
We have, Norma. We have
Yes.
a question for the researchers focused on solid waste. Was there any issue related to gender in the findings of your research?
It's for both of us, right? But
Yeah.
maybe I can start. In my case, while gender was not one of the main components of the research, there is definitely a gender aspect, an interesting gender aspect in the waste picking population, the informal way speaking. During this specific, during the resurveys, I think the demographics of the surveys or the way speakers that we found were relatively balanced between men and women. But for the previous more qualitative approach that we took when we did the interviews and talked with the people, with both the leaders and the people, what they were saying is that the way speaking activities are some activity that is represents an important source of livelihood, particularly for women, because in many cases, what these people, people who engage in informal way speaking search is on one side to have some sort of independence in achieving their livelihoods, and many women who have many kids and they need to take care of them, they leave other types of jobs, such as working as maids at home or working in some industry, and the way speaking activity allows them to have their own times in order to, when they have the time, for instance, during the daytime, they take care of the kids, they take them to the school, and they engage in the way speaking activities at night. And in many cases, although this is not this shouldn't happen because it represents a risk for the kids, they even take their family with them. They take the children to the way speaking activities with them. That's what we found.
And there is another question, the same question asking about the articulation process among CETESB, City Hall, the state government. Yes, there's too much things toward this. For example, CETESB has an agreement, a cooperation term with the, for example, fire department. It's from government that we exchange cooperation, training, and even with the city halls, the same, the civil defense, the same. For example, in the city of Cubatão, in Santos, Cubatão has a concentration of many chemical industry and oil refinery, and that's where it happened, that accident in 2015. We worked together with them previously the accident and during the accident. We have to work in both situations. We have to be prepared and we have to be prepared to respond. And what else? We received people here at CETESB school from civil defense, from city halls, and indeed we received, there is for every course, CETESB, because CETESB is a company and the courses, we pay for the course, but we offer some opportunities for those government institutions to take part of this training course, scholarships, of course. So there are many other initiatives between CETESB and remember that CETESB is an environment agent and take part of the civil defense of the state of São Paulo. So it's not only, CETESB is not only an agent that to give permits for the activities, license permit, and to fiscalize. Obviously, we have to do this. It's a part of our nature of existing. We have to do to fiscalize. But also, for example, when we went to Antarctica, a mission in Antarctica, it's not to, it's moreover to cooperate than to fiscalize, of course. So we have many different actions throughout the state.
Well, I think I could just share a little about the gender question as well in waste management, and in our specific approach about the vulnerability dimensions, there was no issue particularly related to gender, but of course, women, especially thinking about the informal recycling sector, as well as Denise was talking, they are more vulnerable during these activities. So here in Brazil, it's more common to see women working as way speakers in associations, because then they can have they are more safe. It's a safer environment for them. And men working as individual way speakers or small groups. But in this case, both of them were very much impacted by the pandemic, because even the associations had to stop working in most of the cases, because the government would not say, would not confirm it if it was safe, if it was an essential service. So I think in general, it was, we did not have any specific finding about gender in this case.
We have a question for Dr. Denise. What were the main challenges the pandemic brought for waste management in Bolivia?
Okay. Thank you. So actually the fieldworks for the research were much before the pandemic. But however, for what I've seen that was happening in Bolivia, I mean, something similar to what Dr. Cristina said. The activities, I mean, Bolivia, as many countries in Latin America, at the beginning of the pandemic, because of the panic that people had and because of what was happening in other regions, we had a really early and strict lockdown at the beginning. So during that time, even people couldn't go out. I mean, you couldn't go out at all during the house in the whole day. And obviously, the way speaking activities were, particularly the informal way speaking activities, were impacted by that. I'm sure they were not able to collect the recyclable materials as they usually did. And yeah, again, related to the vulnerability aspects that have been touched already, this group, the informal way speakers, are quite vulnerable and also exposed, not only the informal but also the formal way speakers, because of the masks and all the materials that can be a source of infection. So I am sure this has impacted them negatively in terms of their health and well-being.
We have a question for Dr. Denise. What is the role of informal recyclers in waste collection public policies in Bolivia?
So I didn't go into detail about that part, but the first law, I think, and in Brazil actually is a role model in many aspects regarding the inclusion of waste speakers and the solid waste sustainability of solid waste management in Latin America. But in Bolivia, the first law that we had enacted, specifically talking about waste management, was from 2015, and this is quite recent, already 6 years, but I think the implementation has been really slow. And even for that law, there was many of the NGO groups that have been worked for a long time with the waste speakers were pushing for more inclusion of these groups in and their rights and so on in the law. It is to some extent they are mentioned, but still a lot of more specific regulation is lacking in terms of the inclusion of waste speakers in the national law and in the specific laws at the local level as well. Probably some cities have more advancement than others, but in general it's quite missing still.
Norma, what about the time?
Yes, I have a last question for Jorge, if it's possible. I don't know, I have no much minutes for that. It's about the COVID-19 crisis in Brazil again, Jorge. Yesterday, Professor Paulo Saldiva in FAPESP Lives said that there are a lot of people which have sequels, a kind of problems of a health problem that they not care properly his health. One of them is my question, not Saldiva said it, is my question. One of these are drivers of cars, trucks, and buses. So I suppose that the increasing of accidents in the highways of São Paulo city and in Brazil. And my question again is about how CETESB could contribute in the process of monitoring this kind of the accidents related to COVID diseases in the drivers of these vehicles.
Norma, Professor Norma, I'd say that in this case, this subject is much more concerned with the health sector, much more. We are in a different competence. I say that we did, for example, there is an environmental, how can I say in English? Câmara ambiental, environmental ambient, where the private sector and CETESB work together. And one of this group produced last year a cartoon giving orientation to discard the mask. I think Dr. Diniz, I don't remember Dr. Diniz, or someone talk about this, or Dr. Christine. I don't remember, maybe Dr. Diniz. So CETESB produced it, but produced it together with the health sector, because here we have a difference of competence. It's very, when we start treating of the care about the health, it's much more with the health sector. I don't know if I understood your question, but we have limitation to do something about health issues.
Thank you, Dr. Jorge. So, Juliano, maybe we finish the
first session.
Yes.
Yeah. So, thank you so much for our presentation. We have to finish the first session, and we will break 5 minutes, Norma. To return.
Yes. Kelly is our next moderator. If you are available, Kelly, Rafael is with us. Maybe we can start the second session right now. What do you think, Kelly?
For me, it's okay.
Okay. Hi, Rafael. Good to see you here.
Hi, Professor. Nice to see you.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed for the speakers of the first session. It was an honor for us to see you and to hear your great reflections about the environmental issues that we have in Brazil and Bolivia too. So, Kelly, yes, you have the control of the next session.
Yes, okay, but I think that Denise is chair, yes?
Yes, we. I was also a bit confused.
Sorry. My mistake. You are our presenter. My mistake. Oh, it's a new role for Denise. Sorry,
Yeah.
Kelly and Nicolás are our main presenters in the second session. Denise?
Yeah, no problem. So after the presentations, I will give the floor to Kelly for the discussion. But I will start with the introduction of this second part. Again, welcome to everybody. If anybody is joining just for the second part, bienvenidos a todos, bienvenidos a todos. Once again, thanks to Deliana for the invitation to participate and to chair, and also everybody who is organizing together with her. I think I won't go much into detail of how to proceed, because most people, I would say, they have joined already and they know that they have to how to do the Q&A at the end, or for anything that they want to share on the chat. So I will just directly go to introduce briefly everybody. So our first presenter for the second part would be Dr. Rafael Oliveira Costa from the Public Ministry of São Paulo State. And he will talk about the role of the prosecutors when facing a pandemic and the measures adopted in the field of public health. Before he starts, I will go a little bit more deep into this. But he is a doctor and master and graduated in law from the Faculty of Law at Federal University of Minas Gerais, prosecutor of justice in the state of São Paulo in Brazil, advisors to the Operational Support Center of the Public Ministry of the São Paulo State, member of the Organized Crime Fighting Group, member of the GAEMA Piracicaba in São Paulo, and academic director of the São Paulo Association of the Public Ministry. He was visiting professor at the University of California, Berkeley, as well as visiting professor at the Wayne State University. After him is the turn of Dr. Nicolás Rubido from the Universidad de la República, Uruguay, and University of Aberdeen, Scotland. He is an adjunct professor of the Universidad de la República in Uruguay, based at the Department for Theoretical Physics of the Physics Institute in the School of Sciences. And he is also a research fellow of the Aberdeen Biomedical Imaging Center in University of Aberdeen, Scotland. He was also an honorary research fellow of the Institute of Complex Systems and Mathematical Biology in the mentioned Scotland University. Then we will have the presentation from Senior Professor Norma Valencio from the Federal University of São Carlos. She is an economist, master in education, PhD in human sciences, and senior professor at the department and graduate program in environmental sciences at the Federal University of San Carlos. Also vice coordinator of the Laboratory for Social Studies and Research in Disasters. She is also a collaborator professor at the University of Campinas, both in the state of São Paulo, Brazil. Finally, our discussant for this session will be Dr. Kelly Cristiane Yaros. She's graduated in physics, a master in applied chemistry, and PhD in science physics. Her postdoctoral, she has postdoctoral internships in mathematical modeling, physics, complex systems, oscillators, and control. She is part of the complex systems research groups at the State University of Ponta Grossa, as well as the oscillation control at the Physics Institute of the University of São Paulo, and the ICSMB group at the Institute for Complex Systems and Mathematical Biology of the University of Aberdeen in Scotland. She is a member of the postgraduate program in chemical engineer and environmental engineer at the Federal Technological University of Paraná in Brazil. Thanks everybody for joining. So we can start now with the first presenter, Dr. Rafael Oliveira Costa, and as I said, the title of his presentation is The Role of Prosecutors When Facing a Pandemic, Measures Adopted in the Field of Public Health. And the presentation is about due to the health crisis of COVID-19, prosecutors assume a more relevant role in the field of public health. Based on best Brazilian practices, his study aims to determine how the prosecution service can overcome challenges and fulfill its mission while respecting human rights and rule of law with the highest quality and efficiency. So yeah, you can take the floor, Dr. Rafael.
Thank you, Denise. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. First of all, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to Professor Norma Valencio for giving me the opportunity to say a few words about this relevant topic to this international audience. Second, I would like also to congratulate all the organizers of this important event in this complex moment we are living right now. Well, I would like to talk about the role of prosecutors when facing a pandemic. To make my presentation more didactic, I have divided it in 3 phases. First, I will talk about a general introduction about health law in Brazil. Second, the unified health system, which we call here SUS. And third, finally, the role of prosecutors when facing the pandemic. Well, the Brazilian Constitution states that health is a right for all and a duty of the government, guaranteed by social and economic policies aimed at reducing the risk of disease and at the equal and universal access to actions and services for its promotion, protection, and recovery. Public health activities and services are part of a regionalized and hierarchical work network and constitute an unified system here in Brazil. According to our constitution, the unified health system, which we call here SUS, is responsible for the execution of actions regarding sanitary and epidemiologic surveillance, as well as those relating to the health workers. I'm sorry, it's not sharing. Okay, I'm sorry. Is it better now, Denise?
I cannot see. I don't know if anybody can see the presentation.
Not Rafael.
I don't have PowerPoint slides.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
So that's totally fine.
Okay.
It's okay.
No
problem.
No problem.
That's the way I usually I like to speak. So I'm sorry. Well,
no, it's totally fine.
Because prosecutor have a lot of things to say, to talk with us. It's not necessary to.
Well, that's the way we are used to make jury tribunals. So that's how I have prepared myself to this presentation today. So I'm sorry. Well, so after this very brief introduction, I would like to talk a little bit about our unified health system, SUS. The SUS was established by law 8080 of September 19th, 1990. According to Article 4, it is composed of the body of actions and health service provided by public organs and institutions at the federal, state, and municipal levels of direct and indirect administration. Thus, federal, state, and municipal public institutions of quality control, research, and production of supplies and medications, including blood and blood products and health equipments, are also part of SUS. The private sector can also participate in the SUS in a complementary manner. Finally, the SUS duties encompass, among other things, epidemiologic surveillance, which is defined as a group of actions that provide for the knowledge, detection, and prevention of any change in determining the condition and factors of individual or collective health. From now on, I'm gonna speak a little bit about the role of prosecutors when facing a pandemic. The pandemic continues to have a significant impact in many countries in the world and brings new challenges for public prosecutors. How, in such situations, prosecutors can carry out their mission with the highest quality and efficiency while respecting, at the same time, human rights and the rule of law. So that's the question I've made when I was preparing this presentation and my paper. And it's important to think about the implemental of usual, new, and expanded functions of the public prosecutor's office during the pandemic. In Brazil and other states where prosecutors have broad competencies, we are dealing with our role in monitoring the necessity, proportionality, and adequacy of emergency measures. We are also covering the use of modern technology to monitor contacts and compliance with imposed quarantine and other health measures. In the criminal field, for example, we have been examining the continuity and adaptability of prosecutorial work. For instance, how to deal with priority cases, the suspension or extension of procedural guidelines, the supervision of investigations conducted by the police, and attention to specific crimes such as economic and financial crimes related to the emergency. Well, departing from this very broad view of the changes that we are facing, I would like to highlight 6 main aspects of the work developed here in Brazil. First, the restrictions introduced as a result of the pandemic have affected not only civil and political rights, but also economic, social, and cultural rights, with more risks that discrimination against certain groups. This particularly affects healthcare workers and racial and ethnic minorities, which can lead to hate speech, racism, xenophobia, attacks on enforced returns of refugees and asylum seekers, sexual violence, gender-based violence, and domestic violence. All of them have increased during the pandemic period and needed a specific attention from prosecutors. Second aspect, prosecutors have taken measures against new laws based on 2 grounds. First, legislation governing the enactment of measures in emergency situations must primarily respect non-derogable rights. And second, measures affecting other rights must be based on the overarching principle of rule of law and on the principles of necessity, adequacy, equality, proportionality, and temporariness. Third, prosecutors have been called upon to monitor the necessity, proportionality, and appropriateness of emergency measures outside the criminal sphere. The Brazilian civil procedure seeks, through several legal statutes, to offer a broad protection to collective rights. We have what we call collective criminal procedure or class actions. It's a type of lawsuit where one of the parties is a group of people who are represented collectively by a third part or a member of that group. And here in Brazil, we have used this broad and flexible framework to initially lock down cities through judicial decisions because some mayors were not doing so. In other words, mayors did not lock down or have taken initially measures to restrict the social distancing, so prosecutors were filing suits to do so. And nowadays, we are facing two sorts of different challenges. First, to guarantee access to ICU beds to all patients that are affected by COVID-19. And second, to guarantee that vaccination respects the priorities established by the government. Well, fourth aspect, during emergencies, special cooperation and coordination mechanisms have been established by prosecutors with other institutions, such as law enforcement agencies and healthcare facilities, to make it more easy this contact and to show the relevant information about the pandemic. We are also taking into account the negative effects of the pandemic on the society as a whole, that is, the economic impact, the psychological effect, and the increase of domestic violence. It called for a new paradigm of interpretation of Constitution adapted to this exception period. And six, in Brazil, the pandemic has changed the detention of people. It was already an exception to imprison a person. However, during the pandemic, we would imprison people only in very singular crimes due to the risks involved. To conclude, I would like to say that we have in Brazil a problem that makes the situation even worse: corruption. Corruption has always existed here. It's not something new. And I would say that we know it will not disappear completely from the society. The problem, however, is that there is no real citizenship with widespread corruption and impunity. It is not a concentrated phenomenon here in Brazil. It happens from the bottom to the top among public officials and involves different branches. It also involves private companies in subjects related to health, such as medicines and vaccinations. Corruption is occurring right now during this pandemic period in using many methods, such as bribery, fraud, extortion, abuse of discretion, nepotism, among others. We are also seeing here in Brazil setbacks in the advance recently achieved with Operation Car Wash, to the Brazilians, Operação Lava Jato. The prosecutors responsible for the investigations are being targeted by numerous approaches. Finally, the main challenge is to continue to exercise our functions as prosecutors in compliance with the human rights during the pandemic. To conclude, I would like to say that first, there are many reasons to have faith in the future. Second, days of social distancing are coming to an end in the world. Third, rule of law is mostly being observed. Four, we are facing a distinct approach to citizenship and the construction of multiple identities in society. And five, finally, it seems that one of the best ways to fight pandemics is through promoting citizenship. Thank you very much for the attention of all.
Thanks a lot, Rafael, and sorry for the interruption and the misunderstanding. We will continue now with the second presenter, which is Dr. Nicolás Rubido. As I mentioned, the title of his presentation is The Resistance Distance as a Measure to Diagnose Bottlenecks in Transport Networks. Transport networks need to deal with an ever-increasing traffic flow, and this implies that designing or modifying infrastructures such that they avoid the emergence of traffic bottlenecks, offering some redundancy for possible path diversions. In this talk, he will present the resistance distance as a measure to quantify the presence of structural bottlenecks in transport networks. You can take the floor, Dr. Nicolás.
Thank you for the introduction. I hope you can see the presentation. So
yes.
I want to thank as well the organizers for the invitation. This is a very nice conference, and I hope I can instill some topic to discuss further. What I want to talk today is about the resistance distance, which is a measure for networks. And in particular, I'm going to use it as a tool to diagnose structural bottlenecks in transport networks. So I'm no expert in transport networks, but when I think about transport networks, then I think about something like street or road transport. And then you have situations where bottlenecks would be then something like traffic jams. I put here two pictures of Sao Paulo and Jakarta that are famous for their traffic jams. You can visit as well these are two articles from the BBC and the Guardian, and you can visit as well the Mobility Index Sao Paulo, which is a nice web with all data about like how roads are being transited. This is a worldwide problem, especially for cities that have been designed and developed with a car mentality, where there is this circle or like the automobile dependency, where you can increase the infrastructure, for instance, adding lanes to the streets, and this basically prevents congestion, but at the same time, it increases the traffic flow to the point that eventually a new bottleneck appears and traffic jams occur. So it's a reinforced circle that is hard to break. So the idea with the metric of resistance distance is simply to have a tool to diagnose these before traffic jams occur. Now, when I'm talking about transport networks as well, I'm not really thinking specifically about street roads or road networks, although I will be focusing on these today, but you can think of this as well as any kind of transport, or either by other means of transport. So you can talk about like cars, but you can talk as well about electricity being delivered, or even information packages. So this analysis as well is, it can be used in different dimensions. And here I am showing kind of like a city street maps from the open source lab, where the first part is how to translate these city street maps into a network. And for that, it's like you can also take into account some inherited property of the city. So these ones are purely topographic, but in the right ones, I'm showing this nice project which shows how cities look like corals. It's called Coral City Projects. It's an interdesign. And what they do is like you can start in any point of a city and then start transversing it through the streets, like outwards, and you can map all the points in the city like as if they were trees growing from a root. This has also the advantage of inheriting two properties. One is the distance between points, and the other one is the capacity of the road. And this defines network with these properties, and then you can analyze this network and try to see if maybe one of these streets will be congested to the point that a traffic jam occurs. So once you have the framework, which is the transport network, then you go to the analysis, and that's basically on the network connectivity measures. And that means, well, you can either measure things related to nodes. In a city road, nodes would be junctions, and the edges would be the links between these junctions. So these would be the streets or the roads. So you can measure things that are node-related quantities. You can measure things that are edge-related quantities, or you can even measure things that are network-related, and this is as a whole. So for instance, here I have several measures that have been used in the past: degree, clustering, closeness, and so on. So degree, for instance, here I have a network on the bottom, and the green node shows high degree, meaning that there is a junction with several streets coming out of it, and a low degree node, which has a single road coming out of it. So this could be a dead end in a city road. And then you have edge-related quantities like edge betweenness, shortest path, sinuosity, and so on. And this is basically how long or how far I am between 2 points in a network. And here it's where the resistance distance enters as well. This is an edge-related quantity, but I will show you that it's more than just an edge-related quantity. It's also involving the whole network, in spite of being something that is measured between 2 points of the network. There are, as you can see, several other metrics of these, and these as well have been related since the 80s with other phenomena. For instance, in physics, it's percolation phenomena, which means like when happens, like here I have a map of San Francisco from this work, and you can see like at some point, then traffic jams start to occur, and this is the traffic basically here along these lines halts. So some empirical studies, once you have the network metrics, you can correlate to the data on the traffic flow. And for instance, some studies conclude that street connectivity has been linked to greater traffic safety and better housing prices. So it's not just the influence of the topography of the design of the streets that affects the traffic itself, but it affects a whole other dimensions in the city. Networks with higher average nodal degree and nodal density have been associated with more walking and cycling, less vehicle travel, and lower transportation. Other measures, such as orientation entropy that I haven't mentioned, but it's a network-related quantity, has been related to the street's disorder, revealing different design logics behind transportation technologies and cultures. You can see that kind of trait in the South American cities, which is very much like Barcelona here in the bottom, whereas other cities in the world have a more disorganized, especially in Europe, because they weren't at the beginning aggregating themselves based on cars. Star-shaped cities have been reported to alleviate trade-off between climate change mitigation and adaptation, and this is from this work, where you can see I have placed 2 city maps from Iran and Italy. And these things then clearly show that network analysis can help into understanding or both diagnosis and forecasting problems in the city that may emerge, and then we can analyze and try to affect before they happen. So going back to the network, and in order to introduce the resistance distance, I have to talk about how the network is conformed. And that means once you have a city map, you can have like the USA road network, you can make it topological, meaning that you only care whether 2 junctions are connected or not, or you can make it based on shortest path, meaning that the distance according to the road, and this is the map that I'm showing here on the left. This basically tells me how far I have to go. So this network inherits the property of distance. So when I analyze this network, then I have conclusions based on the distance that the roads have. Or they can mean about road capacity, for instance, number of lanes, number of cars in a given time, and that's more directed to the Coral City project, where the lanes basically define the thickness of the branches. Or you can have as well traffic data, and you can have a more informational network where you can see here in the bottom map of the Boston City area as time progresses, when there is free-flowing traffic jams or a network collapse. In any of these cases, you have information about basically the resistance to flow. So the traffic jam is basically an infinite resistance to create a flow of traffic. And you can input this into the network. And basically, with any of these measures, you create something that looks like very abstractly like the picture on the bottom. And this is every junction then is joined by a link which has a certain weight. And this weight is what I'm gonna call resistance, the resistance to flow. Sometimes you can measure, like for instance, if you're measuring velocity, you're measuring something like conductance. So you're favoring or disfavoring traffic flow, which is the inverse of the resistance. But then once you have this, then you have essentially a matrix with different elements that also can take into account the directionality of the street. So if it is a one-way street, then this matrix will be asymmetric. So there will be a number on one side, but it won't be on the other side. And this is the connections between the junction 5 and the junction 2, and the junction 4 with the junction 2, and so on. So sometimes if you have a 0, means that there is no street connecting junctions 1 and 6. Right, so once I have the network, then I can move forward and try to analyze it with this other metric. I can also use the classical metrics about like how many degree has each node, and this basically accounts for how many streets come out of this junction. But the resistance distance, what it does is like it improves the analysis when we are doing with shortest path. The idea comes or stems from circuit theory. In that case, what you have is the charges flowing through a circuit, and then the intensity reaches to a junction where it diverts. It can go through 2 branches, for example. And in these 2 branches, then you have a certain resistance to flow. So what happens is that these 2 branches then actually create a resistance that is lower than if they were separate. So the parallel resistors, they add up like this quantity. This means that if one as well it's bigger than the other, then the flow will go through the smaller one, but at least it provides some sort of decreased effective resistance. And this is the equation. And when actually you have series of resistance, one after the other, then what happens is you have an increase in the resistance to flow, and that this would mean something like in a city-wise, you would have more and more cars jamming one after the other because of this series of resistors. So the problem is like, okay, this view of circuit theory is well enough when things are simple, but what happens when you have like lattices or something more complex as any other city, and you want to go from point A to point B, and what the circuits are telling you is that you have to calculate basically all the paths that you can go from A to B. And the resistance distance is the measure that accounts for all these paths. So this is why I was saying that it is a certain local measure, because it tells me how easily would I go from point A to B, but at the same time, it has information of all the paths that can lead from A to B. The way that it's calculated, it's here, it's through an inverse matrix known as the Moore-Penrose matrix, and it's through the Laplacian matrix as well as the network that I'm not going to go into details here. But basically, again, I'm repeating, myself, but the resistance distance it's a measure that quantifies all the paths, because thinking it in a city-wise, sometimes the main arteries are the ones that have the most traffic in. So sometimes knowing parallel paths will help me to shorten the time that it takes from going to point A and B, instead of just taking the arterial roads. Here is an example, a simple one. So I have 4 junctions joined by a street, and then when I want to go from 1 to 4, what would be the result of applying this matrix calculation? What it does is like, okay, the network of these street roads would be a matrix that has ones along the elements out the diagonal. And this would be the connection between 1 and 2, the connection between 2 and 3, the connection between 3 and 4. This is a value 1. And when I calculate the resistance distance, then I get a matrix such as this one, where again, the off-diagonal elements remain being 1. But now if I want to go from 1 to 3, now I get a yellow, which is 2, which is obvious, because now I had to jump twice. So this is still a distance in a sense, and that's why it keeps the name. But the interesting thing happens when I have like more complex networks. Here I have like, let's say 4 cities connected with a few, between them with a few roads. And when you analyze the resistance distance, you get a matrix such as this one, where you can see that the values of the connections within the cities are low, but intercity becomes high. And these are the points where you can guess that a possible traffic jam will occur. So then these matrix entries have different information. One is that parallel paths decrease resistance, because it's a sort of improved redundancy in the transport network. Then the serial path increase resistance. This means that because they are consequently one after the other, they decrease the traffic flow. And then bottlenecks between any 2 junctions that we want to reveal in the network are revealed by this measure when you have large values. And I leave you with the last slide, and to thank you all with the highlighted publications of the moment. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay. Can you see me? No.
No.
Anyway, yes, maybe I think something's wrong with my camera, but we will continue now with the last presentation. In this case, from Norma, Senior Professor Norma Valencio from Federal University of San Carlos. As I mentioned before, the title of her presentation is Intersecting Infrasystems Issues as Trigger Points of Multifaceted Crises. Brazil has been moving towards the multiplication of disasters, including those of catastrophic proportions. These crises expose the problematic nexuses between different infrasystems, such as sanitation, road, energy, and communication, which point to the complexity of the sectorial challenges, as well as the arising of sub-crises. Based on the dialogical perspective between sociology of disasters and complex systems, she will share her reflections on emblematic cases that occur in her country. Norma, please, can you take the floor?
Thank you very much. Denise, I'm sharing my presentation for you. Firstly, I have to say I'm especially grateful for Deliana and I'm very grateful for Deliana and her team from the University of Manchester to this great opportunity to share with you some thoughts that I have about the infrastructure issues and the systemic crisis in the Brazilian context. My presentation is about the intersecting infrasystems issues, a strategy point of multifaceted crisis. Very quickly, I'm covering three topics, which are not intended to bring anything new. There is a pretty obvious, therefore, I bring them more in the sense of reinforcing their importance regarding the Brazilian context. The three topics are an infrastructure, as the sign about development, perverse connection between infrastructures when everything changes around, and crisis that escape of the management borders of their associated infrastructures. Since the 50s, such as occurred in other countries, successive governments in Brazil, especially at the federal level, and which authorities were in different ideological spectrum, choose for a development model based on the transition to a highly dependent urban way of life in large infrastructure. As everyone knows, these large investment projects happily transform space, leaving social and environmental scars there. On the one hand, the official narrative about the benefits of these infrastructures almost completely mask their collateral effects. It has been nearly 50 years since Mary Douglas and Wildavsky warned about this, as well as nearly 30 years since Giddens and Becky equally point out the inseparable perverse effects of so-called risk society or late modernity. More recently, authors such as Bauman and Bordoni, Alan Turing, and again Ulrich Beck have emphasized that the rhythm which requires intense spatial modifications and generate metamorphosis of risks produces crisis after crisis. In Bauman and Bordoni words, it's perhaps the same immense crisis that feeds itself and changes over time, transforming and regenerating itself as a monstrous teratogenic entity. Brazilian anthropologist Gustavo Ribeiro would said in 2012 that these large infrastructures become iconic objects in relation to it. Any argument against them seems too small and ineffective. The network of relationship that build these iconic objects involves a permanent articulation between large companies from different sectors, engineers and architecture offices, law firms, technicians from public institutions who evaluate these projects, and of course, politicians who occupy decision-making positions in government that approve the projects and release the money for them. A huge infrastructure whose insertion modify and destroy ecosystems and ways of life, and insignificant measures to put warning systems such as sirens in the communities sounds ineffective, since the people won't be enough time to save themselves. The feeling of impotence is so great that it becomes an additional component of the local social suffering. For example, in recent years, under a leftist government, a large hydroelectric power plant was materialized in the Amazon rainforest, which was planned in previous decade under military government in Brazil. Many of the social environmental compensation measures for the affected indigenous and riparian people have not been complied with. And when a dam safety risk occurred at the end of 2015, due fails in the project, with the threat of collapse and flooding the community immediately downstream, the affected people were also not properly heard and compensate for the damage and losses they suffered. The main thing I want to highlight here is that the territorial modification, environmental damage, and social tensions that this kind of infrastructure are producing generate energy for an integrated transmission system in national scale, and whose main consumers are in the large cities of the center-south region of Brazil, which seem not to have enough propensity to understand the relationship between the problems of the rainforest and its urban way of life, the collateral effects of urban lifestyle are being carried on the shoulders of the others. The second aspect I like to highlight here is about the perverse connection between infrastructures when everything changes around. Infrastructures with different purposes are implemented by companies, organizations, institutions that materialize their rationality about the use of the territory and of the social life that will meet it. The overlapping of infrasystems are create a double face, which is to make benefits, but also to produce a synergy between risks, that is, creating a collective effect greater than a collective side effect greater than what the management modes of the sectors involved can deal with. This requires other sectors, organizations, and institutions, from civil defense to residents association, must be mobilized to mitigate the damage and losses caused due to the inability or insufficient of planners in designing risk dynamics compatible with the environmental in which their infrastructure tried it. Each infrastructure institution adopts its own governance dynamics and repertoire of meaning and operational dynamics, with different capacities and rhythm to understand, decide, and deal with association to repair the failures of the functioning of this implementation and management of objects. So, when the infrastructure cross one to another, these different rationalities and rhythms need to tune in as quickly as possible, but they have a lot of difficulty to achieve it. To make this matter worse, we are not just talking about organizational dynamic that have the challenge of work at the same pace, but environmental dynamic made unstable, such as climate change issues, precisely by the development model that said that the set of mega infrastructures represent. For example, roads and the systems of water supply planned in the territory based on a history of hydrological dynamic, that is, information from the past. However, the hydrological dynamics to base infrastructures need to deal with probabilities of extreme events soon, as well as a large degree of uncertainty in the wider future. More than making this a problem exclusive to climatologists, it's necessary to ask to social scientists about how the recognition of uncertainties can reformulate the demand for the services or products of these systems. For example, it is changing the way of use of some systems, such as school, sport halls, and even cattle show parks, which are being used in Brazil as temporary shelter spaces for community whose homes haven't been flooded. Flooding crisis has become a systemic crisis in Brazil, and the complexity of infrastructures that suffer damage and require repairs is significant. In addition to the loss and damages, this causes to residents, local business requiring the expenditure of money to fix things that will break down again in the next flow, unfortunately. The last reflection that I want to share with you is that the crises triggered by the failures of association infrastructure are not only desolation and failure, but clues to changing of the development model. If you saw, the mentality of the public entity make it possible. Crises triggered by the failures of association infrastructure escape their management boundaries. First, for the complexity of contemporary crisis, it is a matter of institutional survival to recognize that the problem that they need to deal with are beyond the logic of the institutional culture in the present days. We live in an area of systemic crisis and systemic risks that are bringing novelties in the way that they materialize. For example, in Brazil, different types of crises are occurring in the same cities. This is a photo I took of a poor community in Manaus, state of Amazonas. Is the capital of the state of Amazonas. This photo I took in 2009, whose circumstances are identical to those that are happening today, which shows that the institutional reaction time to predictable phenomena is too slow. For these days in Amazon region, the health crisis related to COVID-19 occurs at the same time of a flooding crisis, at the same time of the crisis of public security, etc. This crisis of public security is related with attacks of criminal factions on public equipments, including public transportation and ambulances. All of this put in suspension the vaccination of the population, as well as closed the public transportation and the services of the schools. The problem here is how not to reduce one crisis to the features of the another. That is, to make the rationale of the sectors, of the all sectors involved, friendly enough for the citizens to be able to see a light at the end of the tunnel. This is a similar situation in the countryside in the state of Rio de Janeiro. This is some of the books related to the issues that are shared with you. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Oh, I see that Sidney Furtado is with us now. So I ask to Kelly if it is possible Kelly, is possible to share your space with Sidney Furtado, who have time enough to this. Kelly,
sure, of course.
Yes, Kelly is our main discussant in this second session, and Sidney was the discussion of the previous session that we had today. Denise, it is for you. You are the moderator.
Yes, totally fine. So I will give the floor now then to Kelly and Sidney for the discussion section.
Okay, Kelly, the floor is yours, please.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if Sidney would like to start, or I can start and then we can share our space. What do you prefer?
Oh, hi, I'm Vinicius. I'm an engineer in Brazil, and I'm working with Sidney here in São Paulo Civil Defense. So how we can share our job, or we can talk about in this image, in this video.
Okay, and then let me start this because I have so many annotations in my table here. Thank you, all the organizer. For me, is a good pleasure to be here. All the presenters in this workshop related in so many information about the social problems, environmental problems, economic problems, and the stakeholders problems. In my view, all the important things in these talks is connected. In the first time it is separated, but in final view, this information are connected. First, the professor, the Dr. Jorge, Denise, and the Christine talk so many things about the environmental and the connection, the economic and social information, but I would like to give the thanks for this information, and I have just a few comments about this, and then I pass my time for Sidney comment this. Professor Christine talk about the waste and so many times, and this is one subject interesting for me, because I work in university, and we look for so many things in the environments about the hospitalar waste. This is a good problem to study, because sometimes materials cannot recyclable, like infected subjects you insert in your bill or in your bones, and this is contaminated, and then you cannot recycle this. The good solutions for this is encapsulate the use of this equipment, and then we can put this in a big containers, and then stay in this behind the hospitals or in specific places of the Amazon, but it cannot recycle. This is a big problem in our society. I think the good solutions we proposed in our book, I look for this book because we put in the Christina put in the chat, the link for the book, and then I assess, and I saw so many suggestions for community. How provide this, how you can reunite our community and suggest the solutions for the waste. This is good, and I think this is the best way for our government. About the Dr. Jorge, I listened the talk and I saw so many problems about the traffic together the ambiental environment. This is a good point because always we can see these accidents. In this week, I saw in state of Paraná state, one accident like this. 2 cars crash, and then one truck stuck in this crash, and then put out all the oil, the vegetable oil, in the road. But in around this road, there is one river, the important river of the Paraná state. And then the cautions of this society about this case is not clear for the population because of the information. How good is our journalists about the information? Because sometimes the information is not clear and the information is not real. This is, I think the information is one the most complicated problem in our life. In ambiental cases is like this. We had one time ago one big problem about the ambiental cases in Vila Velha, one park, important park in Paraná State. And they involved not just the ambiental cases, but the electricity cases. And then how they fight the ambiental cases with the big companies of the electricity. And then I think this work is related Nicolás Rubido presentations because of the traffic of the energy involved the talking. I have annotations of separated cases, but and the Denise talk is amazing because she compared so many things and they present the statistics about the cases in country, and I think they compared with so many things is good. And then I don't know if Sydney their considerations about this now, please.
Hello?
Yes, we listen to you now.
Hello, my name is Sidney Furtado, I'm Director of Civil Defense Campinas. Thank you for taking invite. Engineer Vinicius também que apresentação. Então, a importância do sistema de risco em resilient cities. Então, Vinicius.
Hi, I'm Vinicius, and I'm an agricultural engineer in Brazil, and I'm working in São Paulo Civil Defense. So if you wanna, I can share my presentation, or we can speak in an informal group. You have to decide that. So in Brazil, we have a different types of ecosystems and realities in natural resource. So we can see there is Cerrado, we have Atlantic forest, we have another types of natural resource, and in this actual system, in a pandemic, in actual reality. So it's a challenge for our population, and we have to decide, we have to discuss, we have to study, and we have to share our participations and our ideas about that. So we have a framework group, and there's in development a new system to interaction and decision making in this reality in Brazil. So how we can see, we have in São Paulo some expanding the data ecosystem, and we have to share and choose these facilities and investment those measures. So how we can see here in São Paulo, we have actual government, and in Brazil, and we have to decide how we can have to development this future to our communities and to share these decisions and participation management of the risks. So how you can see, we have indigenous populations in Brazil, and there is a population that have a poor situation and in this actual pandemic reality. So this is a new bridge and greater communication between social systems. So it's a particular system in Brazil, and we have to involve and share this experience in indigenous and native communities. There is increasing diseases in these populations, and we have to decide and to take a decision about this health population. It is difficult in Brazil because we have different types of realities in this type of populations. So how you can see, I have to share with you these frequent disasters in Brazil. We have fires in forests. We can say in Amazon, in Cerrado. With this, our actual reality in pandemic situations, there is so many risks to involve in this space. Okay, so there is a common idea between us about this making cities resilient. So it's a common acknowledgement in our group here in this presentation. So this is a 10 ideas for resilient cities. Organize for disaster resilience, identify, understand, and use current and future risk scenarios. A financial capacity for resilience, and something about urban development and designing. Something about safeguard natural and functions about natural ecosystems. Something too about institutional and organizations in Brazil. about the government, about the companies, about the population, about our community. So another point in this presentation is about understand and make a participation in social capacity for resilience and increase infrastructure resilience. So something about disasters and to make a strand, and something about actually government in Brazil, and expedite recovery and build better systems. So now in Brazil, we have a system to development and discuss between our community and our universities and our governments, and making our communities and our people to invite them to participate and share the ideas and the reality and the facts and the risks in a app system to enjoy and increase our participation in making decisions. So our city, actually Campinas in São Paulo state, we are development and app, and we are in the stage C. Campinas is a city actually in a high level in this discussing in Brazil. So how I want to share with you our app. It's a first idea in our city to communication and participation with a great organization in Brazil called Fiocruz, and we are development app to so in this app the population and the community can input and discuss something like animal diseases and how it's present occurring in this reality about native animals and diseases and zoonotic diseases. So now I have finished sharing with you some recommendations to discuss in our next jobs. Promote a better understanding of multidimensional nature of risks from a systemic perspective. Engage key stakeholders to take part of design, planning, and implementation of recovery efforts. Ensure policy and decisions are based on evidence, promoting the coherence and articulation of risk reduction, climate and development agendas. Use the opportunities of COVID to prioritize resilience building and building back better and greener in the region. So something like a cooperation and transform learn lessons in effective mechanisms of regional collaboration. So this is our first step in this discussion, and we can make another jobs, another webinars. So we are here to share and participate with you. It's it. Thanks, and it's it.
Thank you. I don't know if Kelly has any other thing that you would like to discuss, or Norma. I think at the moment we don't have any more questions. Besides that,
for Sydney, no, but I have a question for Rafael, for Dr. Rafael, Nicolás, and Norma. Now my view.
Go ahead, Kelly. Denise, how much time do we have?
we are a little bit behind. I mean, we were supposed to finish like 5 minutes ago, so maybe, I don't know, a few more questions and
then
okay,
I can
finish.
I can generalize every.
Okay, go ahead, Kelly. Thank you, Denise.
Thank you, Dr. Rafael, Dr. Nicolás, and Dr. Norma for your presentation. You present the interesting views, and I have a main question about the some points, but I need to generalize it, and then I think so many things lost in our discussion. First, the Dr. Rafael told us so many things important, but I think the main case is SUS, S-U-S, the system of our Brazilian government. And this is like a bottleneck of our government now, because we have one pandemic case, but this is crazy because we have a pandemic crisis in continuous time, like infection, the obesity, like immunodeficiency virus. But what's the main problem? What's the bottleneck of this case? The efficiency of the latest, or the spaces in our government, in our state of the hospitals. But this involved not just the public, but the private system too, and the industries and the environmental cases and everything in this case, because like in this point, in our view, Dr. Rafael, do you think the companies' donations, this is just donations for the good hair, or this is propaganda for our proper industry?
Good morning, Kelly.
Good morning.
Oh, that's a nice question. I don't know whether I've got your intention with the word donation. By donation, you mean donation of medicines, vaccines, or just donation of money?
Sometimes we talk about the money, because the donations, when the journalists talk about this, sometimes talk the medication donations or the kits donation, but in final cases is money donation. Yes.
Okay, because we have two aspects here. One aspect is the vaccine donation, because the US is now donating vaccines to Brazil. So I think it's part of the good policies between countries, but it's also in a way to show the advantage of the product they have in the US. So I think there are two views involved in this donation. But concerning the money donation, I would say that the question is even more complicated. It's very complex to understand the relation between helping someone else and trying to make some kind of propaganda. So I think we have two perspectives here. It's not that it's not a way to make propaganda, but I think in the very beginning of the crisis, it was much more, people were much more concerning with helping others because we were facing something completely new that we haven't seen before. So I think that in the very first beginning of the pandemic, we really had people showing their altruism. They wanted to help others. But now what I think is that things have changed, and there is still some altruism and people trying to help others, but I think there is lots of propaganda involved in making donations. It's not that it's not that donations are not important. They are important. I think they are essential, but it also involves an aspect which is some sort of propaganda. And what worries me more is that sometimes it could be used in a way to sell their products. So they could make that donation and they put that donation in the mass media to show that they are doing that. So that sort of donation usually involves a way to make some propaganda, and it's always something that should be seen with very seen with some I would say some with a different view, because on one hand it could brings lots of chances to people who do not have chances now, but on the other hand they could involve some sort of corruption behind what they are doing. So I think that we as prosecutors have to take some care with these donations and see what is the real purpose to avoid some sort of propaganda behind what they are doing. So that's my point of view, and thank you very much for your question.
Thank you, Dr. Rafael. This is my point of view. This is good consideration. And to connect it, Norma, in this discussion, and I think this is a main point of the transformation of the society, because when the industries like I talked about the industry, but not just the industry in this case, because the transformation of the society is about a little bit points. But the transformation of the society about the donations like this. Because we have cases when the big stakeholders and the big industries gave money, like a Vale, and then brought the houses for the person, and then for the population in this specific area. But what's the main information in this in now is the situation of the state of the Mariana or like around, or the donation of the house.
Oh, it's a very good point, Kelly. Thank you for your question. It's a very critical situation, a very complex situation, because let me point out the industry or the big business like this type of company has a lot of branches inside the governmental apparatus, the institutional apparatus. So when this kind of company make a lot of transformation in the territory, and change the environmental dynamics and creates a collateral social effects, etc. The company is enemy of the social environmental previous condition in that space. But the problem is a little bit more complex because the institutional apparatus is expected that the institutional apparatus could protect, could care of the affected people, and as well as the affected ecosystem involved. But the big companies has lobbies inside the institutional apparatus, so the evaluation that the apparatus did in terms of the impact of that disaster is minor that the citizens are expecting. So there is an unfair balance between these three kinds of actors: the governmental institution, the big companies, and the people in local communities, mainly the indigenous and the riparian and quilombolas communities, because the link between these three branches is not a perfect link in terms of a sustainability relationship. So for the public ministry, for the prosecutors initiative, is very, very important in my point of view to put their eyes in this kind of connection of institution of civil defenses, for example, and the relationship of its members with the big companies that provoke a lot of disaster in Brazil. One information that I linked to the Rafael, the question that you did to Rafael Kelly is I have a study that I make with Arthur Valencio and Murilo Batista about the relation with the health facilities in the municipalities of Brazil and the emergency decrease in Brazil. This study will be published by the University of Manchester, a book organized with Deliana Iosifova. And in this study, we proved that there are a huge connection between the municipalities with less health facilities and the more level of emergency decrease related to another types of crisis, not only health crisis, but a fooding crisis, drug crisis, and another types. So the fragility of this kind of infrasystem is correlated of the fragility of another equipments in sanitation issues. Thank you for your question, Kelly.
Thank you, Norma. And the finished part, I connected Nicolás to this discourse. And I like very much your work, not just because I work with this too, but the main situation in this case is the network can be connected all the works in this room. Nicolás told about the traffic, but this is not just about traffic, because he can put another things in our notes and then simulated the situations in our world. If I am not sure, please correct me. But you can connect, you can adaptate your topology for any things, any cities, and all the world. Yes?
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Kelly. That's completely correct. The network approach, let's say, can be used even to treat multiple of systems as interconnected networks. So I think Sydney was just mentioned a system of systems. Basically, you can also create a network of networks and analyze this network of networks and how these interdependencies appear throughout with the resistance distance and the other network metrics. So indeed.
Yes, thank you, Nicolás. To connect Sydney in our discussion now, this is a kind very particular, but not just particular, because we have a big problem and a big solution in the same time. Because now we are talking because we have an internet. But our internet sometimes is not so good. And this is a big problem in every time. The main problem is identification about this in education, like education. Sometimes the universities stop the classes because the students cannot have a good internet in your houses. And sometimes we talk and then our video completely stop. And we talk, wow, but my internet is good. And then what's happened now? I think this is completely explained about in the Nicolás work, because he showed us about the traffic, and this traffic is about the internet, like internet, like signals in our houses. One curiosity, I don't know, but if you have this information, but now a big part of the population stay in houses, in home office. This is increasing or no, our systems? Like electrical systems and networks about the internet, this is increasing or no?
I'm not really sure. Sorry to say, I'm not really sure. I mean, I'm expecting that, yes, but I'm not sure.
Yes, I think this. I provoke. I stuck this because I have no information about this. Completely clear. We can look for this information, but it's not clear. Like we have this information for this. No, this is like a interlines. This is a occult in so many works. But I think it's one good future study because I think increase because we stay in houses and then using more electricity and the internet. Sometimes the persons cannot use the internet in your house, but using our neighbors, and then the flux it's changed a little bit or much. I don't know. I think this is a good subject for the future.
Yes, and maybe one problem is the not only the risky are systemic nowadays, but the scale of the risky is changing. Nowadays we have the trans-scale risk related, for example, to this kind of issue, Kelly. It's a main challenge that we have to deal in the education, in the other public policies, I suppose.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. I have just one finished question for everyone. Do you think the situation, every situation present here, like waste, traffic, governmental situation, networks for in specific cases, and the public health, every situations. Do you think this is changing in next year? So many problems are here is problems about the years ago. Yes, this is not just for the problem about the COVID situation. It's an accumulated problem. Yes.
Yes.
Please, Sydney, I think you can talk.
Yeah, I want to talk with you our difficult situation about our actual government. It's horrible, and you have to change the situation. You have to decide and choose another person to govern Brazil. No. And I want to listen all them and about this situation and our idea about that. We have to change, we have to decide, we have to share with our population, we have to choose another person now.
Thank you. Maybe the education is the way.
Yeah.
Totally.
Okay.
You have to put importance in our universities, in our organizations. We have to change this actual situation. It's so important to us.
Yes. Thank you, Sydney.
Okay.
Now, Denise, I give you the floor.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. So we went a little bit more from the time that we had planned, but I think it was worth it. We had a nice discussion from both of the sections. And yes, I would just like to thanks once again to the organizers and to all the presenters, the discussants, and also the participants attending the webinar, and just remind them that the next session is on June 22nd. I think we have like 3 or 4 more sessions for the INFRA Plus series, and the next one is on June 22nd about with the topic of violations. So yeah, that will be it. Thanks, everybody. It was good to see you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.